Perfect. So a few goals of today's event is to learn the basics of EV community planning. We're going to understand some of the resources and toolkits available. We'll highlight some best practices and lessons learned from our 4 community panelists. Okay, so here's an overview of our agenda today. So this is a 2-hour meeting. We're going to highlight some, community EV planning overview for everybody who is new to this process, as well as some of our community planning, EV planning resources for you. If at any moment you have questions, please do type them into the chat and we will make sure to address those during the designated times. So after we cover those first 2 presentations, we'll allow for some Q&A that are specific to those 2, and then we'll move on to our community panel. And then after that, we'll make sure to have Q&A time for you all in the audience as well. So really quickly, if you haven't heard of us yet, my name is Amy Maxey and I'm the program manager with Northern Colorado Clean Cities. And we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization partially sponsored by the U.S. Department of Energy's Clean Cities program. And as a part of this program, we really advance the nation's economic, environmental, and energy security by supporting local actions to promote the use of domestic alternative fuels in transportation, which includes electric vehicles. So if at any time, you have questions about alternative fuels and alternative fuel vehicles, please definitely reach out to us and we'll be happy to assist you. And now I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Lynn, who is going to cover Xcel Energy's Partners in Energy. Lynn, go ahead and take it away.
And you can see just up on the screen a few of your neighboring communities that have already gone through the EV planning process. We're seeing more and more of these every year, and they look very different for each community. So this simple graphic just explains what that planning process looks like. And for those of you who are involved in other community planning processes, not even EV specific, it should look pretty familiar to you. Starting with this idea of, defining who should be around the table, who should be engaged, and then also understanding where your EV baseline is, where are you starting from so that you can set those visions and goals and move down to kind of organizing your plan by focus areas, identifying and prioritizing which strategies make the most sense, and then creating the work plan to go ahead and implement that final roadmap document. But we know, of course, any planning process can get pretty overwhelming, especially such a rapidly evolving industry as EVs are. So a year ago, Partners in Energy developed this EV roadmap toolkit that not only walks you through the planning process, but also provides some strategy ideas, examples, and other resources for you to explore. This toolkit is free and easily accessible at xcelenergycommunities.com/EV toolkit. You can see that link on the screen and I'll drop it in later. So you can, like I said, easily hop in there. There's no requirements for downloading it and start to explore what resources are in there. And in response, because we know this is a rapidly changing landscape, the toolkit is scheduled to be updated twice a year. So remember to come back and visit that website often, just so you can get the most recent version and find out, what are new resources or ideas that other folks around the country are doing. And we always welcome feedback on the toolkit since we are updating it regularly. So feel free to reach out to myself or any other Partners in Energy community facilitator if you have some feedback to make it even better. All right, this graphic is actually the toolkit's table of contents in the previous edition, and it shows kind of this wide array of topics that you might include in your plan and start to focus on. We know that including all of it would be a pretty overwhelming document, especially if you're just getting started. So this is really designed for you to select what makes sense to you and select how you want to organize it. It's organized here, you can see by focus area, like by the colors. So outreach and education, public access, fleets, policy. But that really can be flipped around a number of ways to see how you want to break it up so that it makes the most sense for your community. All right. So for each of these focus areas or colors in that previous graphic, You'll see some target audiences, potential target audiences defined, typical barriers that we see around these, key messaging, key outreach channels, different strategies and best practices, written in with some context around them, as well as real world examples that you can kind of link out to and explore to go deeper down that rabbit hole. And then on this, the kind of the red text that you'll see, definitely don't expect you to read it as it's an eye chart, but it's just an illustration of another feature that was added is equity considerations just sprinkled throughout the document. We know we can't narrow equity considerations to a chapter, it really is pervasive. And so there's just a few for consideration. We'll continue to add to these. Sample topics include equitable workforce development around this EV industry, as well as things that you might want to think about when you're thinking about charging access. All right, and finally, the toolkit wraps up with an a set of appendices. So it starts with an EV 101 section talking about, what type of charging levels are there and what type of EVs are there and what are the benefits. We also have a glossary listed of commonly used EV terms, as we know that keeps switching out: charging plug, charging station, charging connector. And then templates to help you through the planning process, like sample agendas, baseline surveys to help you identify potential barriers and opportunities before you even get started, and a list of funding resources, as well as references for the content in the document. All right, and then just to kind of illustrate how this could be used on a really small scale, we wanted to demonstrate what might using this toolkit look like if you were focused on light duty fleets. So in the toolkit, you'll see that there's a table of potential stakeholders by topic area to really help make sure that you get the right people at the right table, because we know that's the most important part. And then applied, we just pulled out what that looks like for a stakeholder group focusing on electrifying a light duty fleet. So we're thinking utility representatives, business owners, large employers, anyone with fleets, local dealerships to provide maybe some, bulk buys, other engaged community members. There's always folks out there that are willing to share their input and expertise, as well as various city staff. So I know I breezed through that because I really am excited to get to our panelists today. But before we switch up, I wanted to see if anyone had any questions about the toolkit, or just kind of high level about what this topic entails. All right, well, I will go ahead. It looks like Amy is back on, so I'll pass it to Amy to talk about EV planning, funding opportunities, tools, and different available advisory services.
Lynn, sorry to interrupt, but there was a question in the chat from Leah around equity. Can you take a look at that and maybe see if you can address it?
Yeah, Amy, if you'll read that off for me, Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much. Sorry about that all. My internet cut out in the middle of that, so I'm glad to be back. So yeah, Leah asked, slide 12 showed that the Partners in Energy EV Toolkit includes equity considerations. Can you share more about whether the EV plan provides suggestions for engagement strategies, any equity specific barriers and solutions, and metrics for tracking if strategies result in increased access?
Yeah, thanks, Leah. That's a really good, so I would say the first edition of the toolkit just didn't address it, right? This is a topic that we're all trying to figure out. How do we meaningfully make sure that the planning process is equitable, and talks on some of those engagement strategies like Leah mentioned, as well as afterwards making sure that we're actually employing these. So I would say it's a pretty light touch in the toolkit right now. There's just those equity considerations sprinkled in, and there is kind of a sub chapter on especially around equitable access. As far as the engagement process goes, there's not a lot right now, but I think that's great feedback to say not only, are people looking for ideas to make sure that implementing these strategies is done in an equitable way, but also doing the planning process. So I will take that feedback back there and encourage you to kind of scroll through some of those equity considerations in that toolkit to see what's in there. And then if you have ideas, we always love to learn.
And just to add to that, for our next workshop, talking about, EV education and outreach, that will be a part of our discussion as well. So we're definitely excited to kind of include that and keep learning as we go. But I'll go ahead and take it away now. So thank you so much, Lynn. I'm going to cover some resources and tools that you can utilize while creating your EV plan. This is going to be relatively high level, but we'll take a deeper look into some of these tools in following workshops. And we're happy to follow up with any of you at any time to, give some one-on-one advising through some of these resources. Next slide. Okay, so the first thing I want to touch on is DOLA. So the Department of Local Affairs offers the Renewable and Clean Energy Challenge Grant Program, which is really an effort to spark reaching Colorado's goal of 100% renewable energy by 2040. Funding is available for the upgrade or purchase of alternative fuel vehicles in certain attainment areas and fueling station infrastructure for local governments statewide. So through the Renewable and Clean Energy Set Aside, you can get funding development grants. So if you have further questions about those, please reach out to us. Another thing I do want to touch on is the Colorado Energy Office can also provide up to a 50% cost share, which is up to $20,000 to communities to develop EV readiness plans by utilizing third-party services. So the applicant match must be in the form of cash, and that can include either funds from local or state agencies such as DOLA, utilities, grants, gifts, donations, or other public or private entities. And one thing about this opportunity is that it's not a competitive grant, so it's a first come, first served basis. And the Colorado Energy Office is currently creating, a PDF on this, and we'll be adding it to their website. So as soon as we learn more, we'll make sure to let you all hear more about it. And then on this next slide, I just kind of wanted to highlight, these are some of the Energy Mineral Impact Assistance Funds grant awardees. And you can see here, we have Estes Park, they have their EV infrastructure plan and they got awarded funding for that. There's also the Colorado Springs Electric Vehicle Readiness Plan. So there are some funding resources for you to utilize, here in Colorado to help with your EV readiness roadmap and plans. And now for funding, this is more general for, let's say you have your EV plan in place, or you just kind of want to get started to implement some of these projects that you may have regarding EVs. There are different funding mechanisms that can help get you there. So for instance, the Regional Air Quality Council and Colorado Energy Office have two different funding resources. One is the Charge Ahead Colorado program, which can give you funding for your EV charging stations. And if you're in the Denver metro region, you can get some funding for EVs as well. There's also the Alt Fuels Colorado program, which is a scrappage and replacement program for medium and heavy duty transit to go to either renewable natural gas or electric. But that is a scrappage program, so it is replacing old diesel vehicles. And then I did want to highlight here, we also have the Low No Emission Program, which provides funding to state and local governments for the purchase or lease of zero emission and low emission transit buses. And I believe a couple of our communities have taken advantage of that are here today. So that's exciting. And for this next one, I really just wanted to highlight, talk to your utility. Depending on where you are, different utilities offer different resources when it comes to EVs, whether it's EV planning or just rebates, there are opportunities for you there. For instance, Xcel Energy, they have the Fleet Electrification Advisory Program, and that includes vehicle and infrastructure assessments at little to no cost, depending on where your project location is. Black Hills has rebates not just for consumers, but also for businesses. So if you have businesses in your community that are looking for rebates and Black Hills Energy is your utility, connect with them. And then Tri-State also has a Choose EV toolkit right on their webpage and some other EV charging station rebates. But the main goal of this slide is just to let you know, connect with your utility during this process. They are more than happy to help you out whenever they can with these things. All right, and now I'm going to cover just a few tools. So the EV Pro Lite tool is probably my favorite when it comes to it can project the amount of EV charging station infrastructure needs in your area. So you actually have a goal of 50,000 EVs in your area. You can put that number in, and this tool will show you what type of EV charging infrastructure you will need if you did have 50,000 EVs in your community. And then the alternative fueling station locator is a great mapping tool that highlights different alternative fuel infrastructure locations, vehicle charging stations. And with that, you can do two things. You can do a lot of things with it, but you could highlight if you already have EV charging stations in your community, you can make that really known so that people who own EVs feel confident in traveling to your locations. And you can also take a look in your area and see, where are there some gaps or places missing where there aren't access or there isn't access to EV charging stations. And the last tool I'll highlight is the A-Fleet tool, which stands for the Alternative Fuel Life Cycle Environmental and Economic Transportation Tool. And this estimates petroleum use, greenhouse gas emissions, air pollutant emissions, and cost of ownerships with alternative fuels. So that's a great one to utilize as well. And I know this is all very high level, but again, if you want to deep dive into some of these, please feel free to contact us at any time and we'd be happy to help you through them. And for the next slide, please. So the Department of Energy, in coordination with Clean Cities, has created a ton of different helpful resources and informational publications, case studies, guidance documents for you to utilize at the AFDC website. And I'll make sure to link that in the chat. And that is also where you'll find all of those great tools that I just mentioned as well. So we have publications, case studies, but not only that, you can check out your local or federal incentives and rebates in your area. So it's a great resource to utilize. And then lastly, I just want to highlight Recharge Colorado. So one of the ways the Colorado Energy Office is reducing EV barriers is through Recharge Colorado, which is a program that assigns recharge coaches like myself to every county in the state to make sure that there is, equal access to EV educational resources, workshops. We host ride and drive events, so people actually get in an EV. There's group buy events, so we can offer discounted and more accessible EVs, to consumers in your area, and different special events such as this one. So if you ever want to get in connection with one of your recharge coaches, definitely, reach out to us and we can connect you. You can see our location here is the yellow in the north eastern part of the state. So that is our region for Recharge Colorado. But we're a great resource for you all to utilize while you're going through your, not just planning, but implementation of your EV plans. Okay, so we are about to start our community panel, but before we do that, I want to do a couple of things. So I wanted to get a poll out earlier before my internet froze, so I'll go ahead and start that now. And we can do the poll, and then while I'm bringing that up, if you have any questions at all, please put them in the chat and we can go ahead and address some of those questions. But I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll really quickly. And you should be able to see it now. Lynn, is it up for you? Okay, thank you. We've got about half of our attendees reporting. I'll give it a few more minutes or a few more seconds here. And thank you for your participation. All right, I'll go ahead and end that there. So it looks like we have a lot of, governmental and planning agencies here with us today, which is great. And as the biggest benefit to adopting an EV plan, looks like environmental benefits definitely are the crowd favorite. And the biggest barrier to adopting an EV plan is cost. So hopefully some of the resources that we've highlighted today can help you address that barrier. Perfect. Okay, so for some Q&A, I'll pull up the chat here. Did you see any questions while we were going through, Lynn?
We just had one about kind of knowing who your utility contact is when you're setting up that stakeholder list. And Leah, I will find your specific account manager and message it to you, but Xcel Energy is kind of building out their EV team so that they can get the right person. So if you're focused on fleets, that might be different versus education. So feel free to message me and I can kind of help you navigate that, or message me directly and I can find your specific account manager.
That's great. And if any, community needs help with that as well, if it's outside of Xcel territory, also feel free to reach out to us at Northern Colorado and we'd be happy to find the best person for you to be in contact with. Well, great. Thank you, everybody. So we're going to go ahead and move into our community panel discussion. And the way this is going to work is that each of our 4 community panelists that we have here today will give a brief introduction into their experience with their EV planning process and any specifics that they wanted to highlight with that. And then we're going to go ahead and ask them some questions that we have already prepared for them, and we'll open it up to all attendee questions there at the end. So stay tuned. Some of the questions that you have might be answered throughout, and if not, we'll definitely address them after. So first up, I would like to introduce Vanessa Soulsby, who is the parking and transit manager for the town of Estes Park. Vanessa, Estes Park started and completed an EV readiness plan during the pandemic. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you handled this challenge?
Yes, thank you so much, Amy, and good morning, everyone. The town of Estes Park is very grateful to be included on this panel today. As Amy mentioned, my name is Vanessa, and I'm the parking and transit manager, and I've been with the town since 2018. Our EV planning journey was very interesting. Not only did we do an EV plan from start to finish during a pandemic, we also had a wildfire evacuation in there as well. So thankfully, we were able to kick off our project last fall and complete it at the end of the year in December. And we are moving into implementation right now. But I think the most exciting part about our EV plan was that the town had made a number of investments in EV infrastructure, particularly level 2 charging stations, as well as writing 2 grants for 2 electric trolleys using some of the funding sources that Amy mentioned. So we wrote the 2 grants, FTA 5339 B and C. So for those 2 trolleys, we had the level 2 charging infrastructure, and then we had been in discussions locally about level 3 DC fast charging infrastructure as well. So lots of exciting investments swirling around electric vehicles. So we were really grateful to have the opportunity to put together a grant application through DOLA. We actually worked through the Renewable and Clean Energy Challenge. And so we had some funding for our plan, as well as through the Colorado Energy Office as well. So putting together those 2 grants to fund the plan. And, the 3 keys to our success, I really feel, are number 1, having a staff champion. And in our cases, we were a staff champion, 2-headed monsters, a public works colleague and I. We put together the RFP and brought on a terrific consultant and managed the project together. So the staff champions, that was really I think the key to our success in getting the project started and completed during a pandemic, as well as terrific consulting support. Our consultant team was absolutely phenomenal and helped guide us through the process. As well as some creative outreach that we did to the local community and our partners that we had to really tailor during a pandemic. Probably similar to a lot of you on the calls, we do, a varied public outreach effort when we do planning efforts like this, mostly centered around getting people together. And we had envisioned, meetings and test drive events and these really cool things that were going to bring people together that just didn't happen during a pandemic, nor during a wildfire evacuation. So we had to think creatively about how to take some of that stakeholder engagement online in a way that just wasn't another Zoom call. So we ended up designing, a quiz, because during our process, we really found that there was just not a lot of knowledge surrounding EVs. And so we wanted to both engage people in our process, but also educate them as well. And we designed a really fun interactive quiz where folks could go on and get feedback in real time. And we had terrific engagement with that quiz tool. We had some traditional meetings on Zoom, as well as a project website too, to just get information out. And we did, weekly pulse check questions. So we changed it up, tried to give people a reason to come back. So that creative engagement with the local community, as well as our partners, our local tourism bureau, Rocky Mountain National Park, Northern Colorado Clean Cities. So we had a variety of different stakeholders joining us in the process as well. So that allowed us to kind of pandemic and evacuation proof our planning process and end it on time. So that's just a kind of a quick snapshot of our planning process and how it was funded, and some of the slight adjustments that we had to make along the way to ensure that we were engaging in a robust planning process that was tailored to our community, engaged our stakeholders, but also could be done remotely as well. This slide is our final of 2 slides, and it shows some of the partners that we engaged, as well as some of the social media messaging that we use to just get people, again, interested and educated about our process. And you can see at the bottom of the right-hand screen some of the engagement feedback that we had. We also really worked closely with our Transportation Advisory Board to make sure that that citizen group had an opportunity to hear from our consulting team and hear from staff at multiple steps along the planning process. We really not only wanted to have a more traditional outreach process to just gain information and engagement among the community and educate folks along the way, but we also wanted at the end of the process for our citizen advisory board, for our trustees, for those local, we have a very active EV owners club here. We wanted those community stakeholders to feel like they could see their fingerprints on the plan, that they were engaged at every step of the process. And I think it really created some excitement. So when we presented the final plan to the town board in January, along with a very specific action-oriented implementation plan, that was one of the requests we had of our consulting team. There was already an excitement building, and we had some really positive feedback from the trustees. It wasn't, oh, you're at the end of this planning process. It's so good to know that they were engaged, and some of them took time on their own personal time to engage with the process as well. Which is the good news. Everyone was super excited and engaged. Also brings the challenge for staff. We got to get some stuff done in 2021 because everybody's watching. So actually had those dual benefits. But we came out of the gate in 2021. We're working with Amy and her team on some really fun, creative ways to engage the community, and have already been in touch with, again, Visit Estes Park, our local tourism bureau, about some ways to coordinate this summer on a campaign. They're going to focus on sustainability in general. So we have we managed to slip in a 2021 strategic plan goal with our town board to make some progress on EV tourism. So we'll be working to define what that looks like, where we are today, and how we'll know we actually made some progress by the end of the year. So that's high on our list, as well as integration of our second electric trolley, which will be coming this summer. And it was really tough to integrate that first vehicle last summer. We had a very small, socially distant ribbon cutting, so not a lot of splash, because at that point we really, in June, we really weren't trying to get people together and cram them all in a new bus. So we are going to try and do that this year and give a big splash for our 2 vehicles, and really just continue throughout the year to find ways to not only implement our plan, but continue the excitement that we're building around electric vehicles. And from a tourism perspective, letting people know, hey, you can come and you can charge here, you can enjoy your drive through Rocky. You can make this your connection point if you're headed up, peak to peak on the scenic byway. You can stop, you can refuel, and you can head on your trip. So we really want to let the folks know that are visiting. Also, to continue building excitement and educating, some of my colleagues that manage the town's fleet, talking to PD about possible implementation of electric vehicles. There's some great interest among our Parks Division staff. They have the lighter weight vehicles. There's some real possibilities there. So there's kind of the internal piece. the tourist piece, and then for me, the transit management piece, which is making sure that we are fully integrating these new electric vehicles in a way that makes sense and has measurable environmental impact. But also we're talking about the value proposition there for investing in those vehicles. And, you know, it's a little bit more challenging than integrating a new gas powered trolley. There's learning curves, there's maintenance issues. So there's training that needs to happen, specialized equipment that needs to work on those vehicles. So we're trying to not only build excitement, but also be pragmatic in our approach so that we can make sure that we welcome electric vehicles, but also do so in a way that acknowledges that they're a little bit different, and then people still have some anxiety and want to learn a little bit more before they're willing to take the leap. So I will just conclude and say that we had it's been a really busy couple of months since we kicked off our EV plan in fall of last year, and I'm only seeing a brighter and more electrified future here in Estes Park as we head into 2021.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vanessa. You guys have done a wonderful job. I do have just a quick question, with your polling question responses and your quiz responses, were you surprised by the amount that you got? Was that kind of near your target, or, were you hoping for more, or which?
Yeah, outreach is always so challenging. I feel like folks have, especially, in a town as small as ours with so much going on, there's a lot of engagement fatigue. I mean, even during a pandemic, we were doing a lot of things. And so we were actually pretty pleased by that. The engagement of, about 150 respondents. And we had, folks that would interact with us every week on our pulse check questions. So I think we were really pleased by that interaction. And we had a stakeholder meeting as well that was held via Zoom. And we had a terrific turnout. I think we had, 25 people or something like that, which is pretty significant for a public meeting here that's not related to utility pricing or parking. So we were pretty pleased with that turnout. And just the fact that, we really leveraged social media too to get the word about what we were doing. We got some social media engagement, as well as our engagement through those advisory boards. So I was very pleased with the level of engagement that we received, especially based on where we were with the pandemic as well. And just folks generally not feeling like engaging a whole lot.
Yeah, definitely. Well, great job. Yeah, it's wonderful to hear. And we'll definitely follow up on some of the points that you highlighted when we go to Q&A. Well, next, I'm really excited to introduce Jessica Hoover, who is the Climate Action Director with High Country Conservation Center. Jess, your organization led the planning effort for Summit County's Climate Action Plan. As you introduce yourself, can you tell us why your organization and the county community members felt it was necessary to go through a separate planning process for electric vehicles?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Hi, Amy. Thank you. So like Amy said, my name is Jess Hoover, and I work for the High Country Conservation Center, which is a nonprofit based in Summit County. And we are the go-to sustainability resource for our community. And our programs focus on climate action, energy efficiency, K-12 education, sustainable food, waste reduction, water conservation. We have a CSA farm. We're busy. And so in 2018, there was so much momentum around climate action planning in our local communities. And so we our local governments about creating a joint climate action plan for the entire Summit County community. And we led that process. We hired a consultant to help us with that. And the greenhouse gas emissions inventory that we completed in conjunction with the plan found that about a third of our county's emissions come from transportation. And strategy modeling that we also completed showed us that a widespread transition to electric vehicles would be one of the most impactful strategies for reducing those transportation emissions. So developing an EV readiness plan was actually one of the key strategies highlighted in our climate action plan. And you can see here on the slide, we have a goal, and this is from the climate action plan, that by 2030, 30% of all registered vehicles in the county will be EVs. And I'll just pause to note when I say county, I am speaking geographically countywide. This is not limited to just unincorporated Summit County. All of our municipalities are participating in this. So we felt like it was important to create a standalone plan because we were really able to dive into those more specific EV related strategies than we did in our climate action plan, right? Which is a very high level plan that looks at transportation and energy use and renewable energy. Creating standalone EV readiness plan really allowed us to think about how do we encourage more EV adoption locally, and how do we encourage drivers from outside of our community to feel comfortable driving their EVs here too. Like a lot of what Vanessa said, since we have a very strong tourism base too, we want to make sure that not only local residents feel comfortable driving EVs, but that our front range visitors or visitors from all over the state or even from our neighboring states know that they can come to a Summit County town and have a place to charge. So that's why we did that standalone plan. I know there's more on the slide here, but we've got more questions to get to as well. So I have a feeling we're going to get to these lessons learned later on, so I'll hit them later.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Next, I'm happy to introduce Winnie Delaquadri, the Special Projects Manager of the City of Steamboat Springs. Winnie, with Steamboat Springs' remote location and weather conditions and the potential that that has to make EV adoption more challenging, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the plan and how Steamboat Springs' EV planning process is addressing those challenges?
Sure. My name's Winnie Delaquadri. Thank you for having me. I do special projects for the City of Steamboat Springs. And really what that means is I get to work on the fun projects. Like this past year, in addition to doing the EV planning process, I've been working on a climate action plan, a tourism adaptation to climate change study, and a regional solar project with 8 governments where we're putting in 13 different solar projects, some of which will fund EV charging stations. So I would say we're still in our planning process. We're wrapping it up. We released our RFP for our consultants in the beginning of March, and then ended up having to extend the RFP due date because everybody was trying to make that shift from working in an office to working at home. So we we got in our bids at the end of the first week in April, and then had to completely revamp with our selected consultant how we were going to do community outreach as a result of COVID. And I think it worked pretty well. In terms of remote, I think a story will illustrate that, and that is that we put together a pretty broad project management team, and that included an individual who had an electric vehicle. She was an early adopter, and she ended up, when she needed a new vehicle, not getting an electric vehicle because, as she put it, it's just too hard. I had a Toyota Prius, and when I went to buy a new car, I didn't get an EV or a hybrid either because at the time that I had the Prius, I literally, when it would snow, I would have to snow blow my driveway, and then I would have to snow blow my street to get me out to the interceptor street that was actually plowed early in the mornings. And at that time, the vehicles were not high enough to actually drive through a couple feet of snow without having to wait for the plow or snow blow. And if you live on one of the early plow streets, that's fine. But if you live on a street that isn't plowed until the afternoon, that can mean that you're just stuck in your house. And so it's these types of things: the snow plowing, winter streets snow plowed, how high are those vehicle clearances? Can you charge in your home, or do you live in multifamily housing? We have a lot of condos, and multifamily housing mostly doesn't have dedicated parking. And so if you can't install or even park close to a building, how do you handle that? So when we went into our planning process, we went into it knowing that there were some challenges in our community that other communities might not face. You cannot buy an electric vehicle here. You cannot get an electric vehicle serviced. If you need an electric vehicle serviced, you've got to spend your day elsewhere. like driving to Denver. So when we were doing our process, we really wanted to look at, what do we have to do in this planning process to make it reasonable and feasible and easy for people to have an electric vehicle. So that really tied into our vision. We want it to be just as easy and convenient to have an electric vehicle in Steamboat Springs as it is to have a gas-powered vehicle. Because if it's not easy, then you're gonna have to be very values-oriented to make that leap. And then our mission was to really make sure that everything in our plan was very actionable and made it possible for people to adopt. Our community has a lot of environmental values. We do community surveys all the time. The natural environment comes out on top pretty much every time. And in our last community survey, we asked about greenhouse gas goals, and our community wants really stringent goal, or really high goals. And so we're thinking, our thought process was, it's not that people don't want to do this, it's that it's really hard and we need to make it easy. So that was kind of the focus of our planning process. One of the things we did was we really focused on our project management team. In addition to having me from the city, we had the environmental health director from the county. We had the sustainability and public outreach person from the Steamboat Ski and Resort Corporation. We had the economic development director from the Steamboat Springs Chamber. We had a representative from YVEA. We had input from our sustainability council. And I think the most brilliant thing we did is we asked Christian Willis with the Colorado Energy Office to serve on our project management team, because he was able to bring in the state's perspective and make sure that when we were developing our strategies and tactics, that we were leveraging and partnering with things that were taking place at the state level. So that was super awesome. Again, our vision, mission, and goals really are, we want to make EVs easy. That's kind of our summary. In terms of our community engagement, we had to completely pivot due to COVID. And instead of doing a lot of bigger meetings, we did a whole lot of one-on-one interviews. And that worked really well to gather the information that we needed from the different groups that we targeted. The one more public outreach thing that we did is we have a farmer's market that was classified as a grocery store and so operated all summer. And I sat at the farmer's market for one of the sessions and talked to everybody who came through that was interested in EVs. And really what that meant is that I talked to every single visitor that was in an EV that had come to the farmer's market. So that was a really great way to tap into our visitor demographic that I wouldn't otherwise have figured out how to do through most of our virtual processes. We did hire a consultant. We thought it would be super helpful to both bring in that expertise as well as that additional capacity for assessment and writing and all of that side. And I couldn't be happier with that outcome. That was really, really helpful. And then when we went to develop our strategies and tactics, our consultants were super helpful in providing a framework. And then we were able to really work with all of our stakeholders and staff to make sure that they were on target and actionable. And I should say we did get Colorado Energy Office funding for the plan, as well as an administrative technical assistance grant from the Department of Local Affairs.
Wonderful, thank you. Sounds like some creative strategies there to create that plan, and bringing in the Colorado Energy Office is always a good idea. I think that was really a great idea. So next, and last but not least, I'm excited to introduce Councilmember Mike Sutherland. Councilmember, you bring a unique perspective to our panel as an elected official. Can you tell us why creating an EV action plan was a priority for Centennial, and why you chose to develop the plan through Partners in Energy?
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate your inviting me to participate in this. My name is Mike Sutherland. I'm on the Centennial City Council, one of the two representatives for District 3. And so I just want to set a little stage for how we got to where we are right now with our EV action plan. Centennial is 110,000 people, plus or minus, and we reworked our comprehensive plan a couple of years ago and adopted it and updated it. And one of the pieces in the plan was to look at renewable energy. So we started out with Xcel Energy getting involved with their partners in energy plan, which was very successful in 2018 and 2019. We partnered with Colorado State University Extension, the representative in the county. We had booths at park events at our Centennial Civic Center Park, which is adjacent to our government building. We kept running out of materials at those park events. People were interested in how to do energy savings at their homes in particular. So in late 2018, actually late 2019, we had one of those electric vehicle workshops using Xcel Energy and the Brendel Group, who works with Xcel. We hosted that at our Public Works building in the community room, and it was the most popular event to date at that facility. We had over 90 residents sign up for it and attend. And learning all about electric vehicles was what the aim of that was. So we thought, great, we have some interest in our city from the citizens about electric vehicles. And so in early 2020, we had a second workshop figuring, oh, this won't be as well attended. We had to turn people away from the first one. And we had over 70 people attend that. So that put us in the frame of mind that we need to focus on electric vehicles. So I just wanted to give you an idea of how this actually sprung from Xcel Partners in Energy as a subset of what we could do. And then it became a focus after we unfortunately had to pull back on park events in 2020. So the city council, of course, was tuned in on the park events, tuned in on our EV workshops. And so we decided to come up with our EV plan. As you can see, our slide is pretty simple. We spent a lot of time in 2020 coming up with the vision statement, which is consistent with our comprehensive plan, and then setting goals. And I think setting goals is important from the standpoint of making them realistic goals. We're a contract city, which means we have only about 70 employees. For a city of our size, that's pretty limited. But we contract out public works to Jacobs Engineering. And so when we set our goal of increasing the number of registered electric vehicles to 18,000 by 2030, we wanted it to be achievable. And then we set out to figure out how to do that. So we came up with 4 focus areas, which you can see on the slide. Our municipal fleet is pretty small. We have about a half a dozen city-owned vehicles, but Jacobs Engineering, our public works subcontractor, obviously has a lot of vehicles in their fleet, which they use for their contract with the city of Centennial. So we got Jacobs Engineering involved right away, and they were on board with our planned goal, which was essential. So Xcel Partners in Energy has been very critical in this whole development of our planned goal. We do have some public stations, which we established about a year and a half ago, and we did use that Charge Ahead Colorado program, which was mentioned earlier in the program. So we only have 2 buildings that the city owns, the Civic Center government building, which I mentioned, and then also the Public Works building. At each of those buildings, we do have public charging stations. They are used, and they've been successful. We've also established some focus areas for public EV adoption. What that means is we've gotten our community development department on board, which handles land development, maintains the zoning code, the Centennial Municipal Code. So we've gotten people engaged from that department to do some preliminary work on updating our land development code and our city municipal code to be EV friendly. EV ready development, you can see that over on the far right as you look at the slide. We are in the process of beginning to engage business owners and developers in ideas on how the city can promote EV development through land development plans that are presented to the city. We do have a couple of areas that are ripe for development. Not too much greenfield left in Centennial, but we do have a few large parcels, and then also in redevelopment. So the targets you can see, which are at the bottom of the slide, those are our targets to reach those focus areas, to reach the goals. So, hopefully I've answered that question, but I think it's key to get city staff involved early on. We have a city staffer who's a management strategy expert in some of our technology initiatives. The city belongs to the Smart City Alliance, has for 2 or 3 years now. The city has been looking at different applications.
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you. Could you please repeat what you said?
I'm sorry. My cell phone thinks that thinks that I'm talking to Siri. I have too many screens. So, get your city staff on board and make sure that whatever you do is going to fit in with your overall city's comprehensive plan. Get individual town council or city council members interested early on by making sure they're tuned in with what's going on. So I'll stop there unless someone has, if you have another question, Amy, let me know.
Thank you so much. We'll go ahead and kind of dive in now to some of our just questions around EV planning, and I'll direct either certain questions to any 4 of you, or we can just kind of have a more broad conversation about it. What I would like to get started on first is kind of talking about the timeliness of it all, and why communities should consider developing an EV readiness plan now. So for each of you, as we know, each year passes, technology improves, EVs continue to become better, more affordable, more efficient. With that being said, why would you think that communities should start planning now rather than waiting for electric vehicles to become more mainstream? And I'll open that up for any one of you.
So I'll jump in and I'll say Steamboat Springs is a resort community in the mountains, and I suspect Colorado as a whole is likely to see a ton more growth as people flee hotter places and come here where it's cool in the mountains. And so I view it now as we have our community is growing. We have an opportunity to make code amendments now that require some thoughtful infrastructure to be built as a part of all new development, whether that be conduits or wiring or anything like that. And then also when you think about our community, we rely on weather, right? Like we rely on snow in the winter for our economy and water in the summer. And our residents are very thoughtful about our need to steward the place that we live and love. And this is one way that we can help do that. So it just seemed to be very, very timely. And again, our experience was people who wanted to do this found it so hard that they had to backtrack. And that seems counterintuitive. Like if we wait, it will never happen because it's too hard unless the barriers are gone. So our thought is we want to get rid of the barriers and make it easy and give people that choice, because right now it's a really hard choice to make.
Yeah, that was great, Winnie. I'll follow up and just say that I think it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg question, right? I mean, people are afraid to buy EVs because they think there's not enough charging, and so people don't buy EVs. And so what do you need first? Do you need the critical mass of cars to have the motivation to install the infrastructure, or do you need the infrastructure to invite the critical mass of cars? I think I was looking up some statistics a few weeks ago for a reporter, and it was McKinsey says that US EV sales are projected to double within the next 5 years. And when you think about that, and you think about the state's goal to have nearly 1 million EVs on the road by 2030, and for those in Xcel territory, Xcel Energy's EV vision to support 1.5 million vehicles in its service area by 2030, I think there's a lot of momentum going in this direction. And I think that if communities put off the preparedness, they're just going to fall behind the 8 ball. And then they're going to find that they don't have the infrastructure they need to support either their residents or the people who are visiting their communities, which could potentially drive people to somewhere else, right? If the ski resort you want to visit doesn't have EV charging, but another one up the road does, well, maybe you'll decide to go somewhere else. So I think that it's just a matter of really seeing the future that's coming and being willing to prepare for it.
Just a quick question from the audience. Speaking of EV preparedness, it looks like we have a question about how are you all updating your code to be EV ready? I know a few of you mentioned that in your opening remarks.
I'll just keep going.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. We last year, through a different project and planning process, we developed a new sustainable building code for our communities, and it was adopted by most major municipalities across the county. And this code requires EV readiness for all new residential and commercial construction. And if anyone's interested in looking at what's in the code language, I'm happy to share it. Basically, single family and duplexes need to have wiring available for charging, and then commercial or multifamily, depending on the number of parking spaces they provide. There are different requirements where some have to have chargers installed, and then some just have to have wiring, and then some just have to have space in the breaker box.
Winnie, did you want to follow up?
I was just going to say we have not done it yet. We just adopted our strategies, and everything goes to city council tonight. So I'm assuming it'll be approved, but we were looking at the same thing. And our big focus is on multifamily and just making sure that anytime a multifamily project comes through, that that project has the ability to either, have EV chargers in a certain number of their spots to begin with, and then to grow that over time.
I can also jump in and say that our consultant looked at our existing development code as part of our planning process, with the knowledge that the town is actually just embarking on an update. That we're going to do a comprehensive planning process this year, and we're going to follow that immediately with a code update, which has not been done in, I think, 20 years or more. So we are very sorely due. So we didn't spend a tremendous amount of time on it, but we will be as we move through our comprehensive planning process. But we did get some great suggestions on our existing code from our consultant. And I'm also happy to share that if anyone's interested.
Wonderful, thank you. And I do have a question now more geared towards, Jess, Winnie, and Vanessa, you all mentioned tourism. As mountain communities with tourism top of mind, how does preparing for EVs play into this consideration? And can you kind of expand on, any specific best practices or creative engagement strategies that you plan on deploying?
So when we did our EV planning process, I stood at the farmer's market, which has a ton of tourists going through it, and talked to people, masks up, the whole thing. And I think you could tell if someone had an EV because they looked at the sign and were like, I am talking to that person. So we got a lot of really good input from them as to where they thought we should have EVs. We need, in the summer, we have 4 state parks, one of which is the 3rd most visited state park in Colorado. And we learned from our tourists that they really want to be able to have EV chargers at our state parks, at the ski area base, in our, where they're going to go have dinner and maybe go shopping, in addition to their lodging. I should note that we're trying to look at not, what do we have to do for tourists, and what do we have to do for ourselves, and what do we have to do for equity? And we're trying to create win-wins. And one of the win-wins that we see as being a possibility is our lodging properties, because our lodging properties, our tourists can use those at night to charge, and our workforce, especially our housekeepers and other equity pieces of our workforce that are folks that live in multifamily housing or trailer parks where it's going to be a lot harder to install EV chargers. A lot of those folks work in our lodging properties. And so if we can work with our lodging properties to do workplace charging and visitor charging, kind of all packaged in one charger, but managed through policies, we view that as being a win-win for both and to both groups. And then the other thing is we feel like we're probably going to have a higher ratio of chargers to registered vehicles than we would otherwise. And we heard loud and clear from our visiting tourists that we're probably going to need to have more level 3 chargers than we would for just our local population, because if you can charge at home, you don't really need that level 3 charger so much. But if you're visiting and you just got here and you want to go launch to a hike, you really do need it.
Quick question from the comments building on Winnie's comment on charging infrastructure and how much you need. There's a question for Mike and Centennial of how you determine that target of 8 chargers to 1,000 households by 2030. I know, Mike, you entered that into the chat, but for the benefit of everyone else, if you don't mind speaking to it.
Sure, no problem. Thanks, Lynn. I'm a slow typist, so I'm a slow talker too, but I can talk faster than I can type. But, it wasn't a scientific decision. We tried to look at the number of residents we have, 110,000. We looked at the state's goals. We wanted to set things realistically as to what we might be able to do. We looked at the fact that I-25 basically divides our city in two on an east-west axis. We looked at Arapahoe Road, a state highway, and we just came up with what we thought would be reasonable given the circumstances. We have car dealerships all along Arapahoe Road. Some of them are in Centennial, some of them are in Greenwood Village. So we tried to look at locations in the city to be logical places where people might want to come and charge their vehicle. So I think the lodging piece is an interesting piece that Winnie mentioned. We do have some extended stay hotels in our city. Working with those businesses is important. Working with some of our large corporate businesses that have Centennial as their home, for instance, Aero Electronics, United Launch Alliance. We're just starting to get those businesses involved in promoting this. So hopefully that answers some of the questions.
Yes, thank you so much. And then I did want to, yeah, Vanessa or Jess, if you wanted to highlight any of the tourism question.
Yeah, definitely. I know I touched on this a bit earlier, but I would definitely reaffirm the importance of working with local community partners. In addition to our tourism bureau, Visit Estes Park, we also engaged with our lodging association and our chamber and Rocky Mountain National Park. Through our EV planning process, like many others on the call, we really discovered that, our first step needs to be getting the word out about what we already have. I mean, we have a really terrific infrastructure here for EV charging. I think, we've got the town's public level 2 and level 3 stations. We have Tesla superchargers. And then I think in total, there's about 25 different locations within the Estes Park area, which is within the town, where you can charge an electric vehicle. Many of those are either at restaurants or they're at RV parks or other lodging areas. So just letting people know the different areas where they can charge, I think was really critical for us. So we can help relieve some of the anxiety that folks might feel like, hey, I don't know, can I go there? We're really working on that communication and marketing aspect and just really trying to make it very easy for people to understand all of the charging options, where they are, how they can use them, if there's a cost associated, if they're public, if they're private. That's been a really big focus for us as we head into this year. And I think that'll be one of our top focus areas as well. And then just trying, any communication that goes out to our visitors through, there's tens of thousands of folks that engage with Visit Estes Park through social media or through their blogs and e-newsletter. Every opportunity to provide parking, transit, and EV charging information, again, to make it really easy for folks. They don't have to put a lot of extra thought into, hey, maybe this is the trip I want to rent a Tesla and check it out. You can definitely do that in Estes Park, and we want to make it really super easy for folks to know that.
One of the things that we're also, is a strategy in our plan is conducting very targeted outreach to homeowners associations because they very often have short-term rentals. So helping homeowners associations figure out how to install charging. We did have the ski areas participate in our planning process, and I think that they all know that it's going to be very important for them to install a lot of infrastructure. And then also, we're eagerly awaiting the launch of the new programs through the Xcel Energy's Transportation Electrification Plan, because we are very likely to provide some local rebates for charging infrastructure. And so if we can capture some folks who have short-term rentals and get them to install charging infrastructure at their homes, or offer bonus rebates to lodging companies to really help incentivize them to do that, we're looking at incentives to really help build that out here.
Yeah, it's always great when you can combine those as well to make it even more appealing. Kind of to continue that on, you're mentioning people that you had involved in your planning process. Jess, you had a unique approach by bringing together multiple jurisdictions in order to create your EV readiness plan. Can you tell us about some of the advantages of doing that, as well as some of the limitations or lessons learned through that process?
Happy to. Yeah. So we had representatives from all of our municipalities, from the ski areas, like I mentioned, a few other large businesses, and then we had someone from the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project sit in on our planning meetings, and then we had our local charge ahead Colorado coach sit in on our meetings too. So starting with the disadvantages, I would say it's definitely slower. You know, if it was one municipality doing their own plan, they probably could have knocked it out. To respect everyone's schedules and not meeting people to death, we only scheduled about one meeting a month. With a community-wide plan, you know, there also needs to be widespread agreement, because this is something that we would like to take to all the municipalities and have them adopt. And because of that, that means that they all have to agree on what's in there. That meant that we couldn't do, you know, actually, that's not true. We do have an overarching infrastructure goal, but, you know, we had to be very careful with our goals and make sure that, you know, everyone was in alignment. Fortunately, and I think that as folks embark upon their own EV planning processes, you'll find this, that most EV plans have very similar strategies in them. So we all know what needs to be done to make people more confident driving electric cars. And so, you know, we did not have any major disagreements over strategies because of that. I mean, it really is, when you start reading several plans, you see, you know, very prominent themes. So that's good. I would say the other disadvantage is that not all of our communities have the same level of resources. So some may be able to move forward with implementing strategies faster than others. And so, I mean, that means that implementation might not look the same everywhere, but we are at least all agreed on the direction that we're moving towards. In terms of the advantages, you know, it really helps for, you know, community buy-in by having everyone at the table together. We're all on the same page with what needs to be done. Like I said, even though the process might be different and some communities might need a little bit more support getting to that end goal, our community, we all agree this is something that we care about and it's something we want to work on together. And then we can leverage our collective resources and brain power to outreach to target groups across the county to share best practices and lesson learned, right? We're all working together. Nobody's siloed in what they're working on. We're sharing this information, sharing what works, what doesn't work. And then we have coordination. So like I mentioned with our building codes, most of our major municipalities all adopted those codes last year, which do have these EV ready requirements. So now it's really helpful for developers or private builders who are in our community, because they only have to learn one set of requirements across the entire community. They're not doing something separate in every individual town. So it has actually been a really great framework for us. We did our initial energy action plan with Partners in Energy through a countywide process, our climate action plan, and now our EV readiness plan. And it's been very successful for us to do it that way.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I feel like it's helpful, you know, to kind of have that similar messaging. I know that's something that, you know, the state is working on too. When we're talking about our EV plan, you know, what are the certain things that we want to, you know, really let all communities know, or what is the same messaging that we want to get out so that it's not confusing. And with that, so Councilmember Mike, you have recently completed an energy action plan and an EV action plan. So how are the stakeholders involved in those different, and how are those two plans interacting?
Well, thank you, Amy. The stakeholders are somewhat different, but there's a lot of overlap in the stakeholders. So I think with the EV action plan, instead of it just being a community outreach to residents and businesses, which Partners in Energy was. We've added Jacobs Engineering, for instance, as I mentioned, who are the public works folks. We've also started to bring in some of the larger businesses. We're working on that, larger businesses in the city, and also doing a little outreach to developers to get their input on it. So I think it's essentially, as I mentioned, an outgrowth. The EV plan is an outgrowth of what was started in Xcel Partners in Energy. CSU Extension is still involved in our EV program through the Arapahoe County representative. So, I mean, we're just beginning the outreach to some of these additional stakeholders beyond the city's, communications department, which was key in the energy Partners in Energy program. And so I think that's probably the main differences in that. Another thing we're going to do is reach out to our 2 parks districts. The city doesn't do parks except for the one next to the city building on Arapahoe Road. So we have 2 parks districts, South Suburban Parks and Rec, Arapahoe Parks and Recreation District. So, that's something that we're going to be doing as well as we unfold this. And, we work together well as a city with our special districts, our parks districts, our fire and rescue district, South Metro Fire Rescue, some potential there. Our police department is contracted through the Arapahoe County Sheriff's Office. Of course, they have some buildings and have people come into those buildings. So we got a lot of work to do, but we're excited about it.
Yeah, thank you. Sounds like there's a lot of opportunity there. I do want to give, Vanessa and Winnie a chance to discuss, other stakeholders you think are important to bring to the table. Obviously, Vanessa, with you being close to Rocky Mountain National Park, partnering with them is pretty crucial as well. And you've mentioned, visit Estes Park as a really big key player, especially it sounds like for outreach. Is there anybody else that we're missing or that you think other folks on the call would find, would be beneficial stakeholders to partner with?
Amy, I think, go ahead, Winnie.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think, I've mentioned the really key stakeholders that we've worked with in increasing and continuing to build our relationship with Rocky is always top of mind because, anytime you work with a federal entity, it's a little bit different negotiation, but I think they're a really critical partner for us. And so we've been investing a lot of time, not only on the EV space, but also in transportation and access as a whole at bringing them to the table. And so I think they're probably the other biggest stakeholder that hasn't been mentioned. And, I think for us as well, I know I talked about this briefly earlier, but we have a really active and long-standing EV owner club. And that group has been really terrific to engage. They're not only are they active, but they're always kind of looking at the latest and greatest in information and technology, and they're helping us identify, gaps in our infrastructure and our information. So that group, as well as there is a growing interest in, electrified micromobility devices. So we're also looking to bring those folks in as well. We've got a really active bicycle advocates here in town that are moving over to the e-bike space. And, for any of you who have visited Estes Park, we have a very, quaint, but limited and non-traditional downtown grid. It's pretty much only a couple of ways to get in and out of town. And so for us, looking at ways that we can shift folks not only to EVs and to cars and onto our transit, but also to some of those personal and micromobility devices to help spread the wealth in terms of how people can get throughout town and feel connected, and also help us mitigate our increasing traffic congestion that even with the pandemic last summer, we were incredibly busy. And we anticipate that will be the same, if not more, this year as folks are looking to get out of the house. So we want to offer them different options beyond, electric vehicle, ride on the electric trolley, or let them know where they can use their e-bikes as well.
So we also found our EV owners to be very, very helpful in pointing out the sticky spots. In terms of equity, we made sure that we brought in the Yampa Valley Housing Authority because they do all of our lower income housing. And they were a great partner in terms of understanding some of those issues. We talked to Integrated Community, which is a nonprofit organization that really works to integrate non-English speakers into our community. And that was very beneficial. One of the things we learned there is that in order for our community to have equity in EV adoption, we really need to look at that used car market and what do we need to support that. And that led us to talking to auto dealers and repair shops to find out, we know you care. What is your business model? And what needs to change in that model to make this something that you could actually invest in and do? And so those were some really interesting and productive conversations. We talked to fleet managers, and we have a lot of property managers that manage, so they're just like 3 companies really that manage all of condo land in terms of whether that's a resort condo that's rented out, short-term rentals, or whether it's long-term low income, like multifamily housing. And so bringing in our property management companies was actually really important, because if we're going to address the multifamily housing charging issues, we're going to need to partner with them. And they were the ones who brought up the issue of parking scarcity as being a big barrier, because if you've got scarce parking and you tie up parking that can only be used by electric vehicles, then you've got to be really cognizant of how you do that and making sure that you're going lockstep so that you're not just losing parking spaces. And that was a big barrier for them to even move in the EV direction. So all I can say is for us, those were very, very critical conversations. And as we move forward towards implementation, those are going to be really important partnerships.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you highlighting, some of the equity conversations that you are having, and how can you have this plan, reach out to everybody in your community. And on that, Jess, you also, and Summit County as a whole, equity is a priority for you all. Can you tell us how you have incorporated equity into your plan?
Yeah, and I mean, in hindsight, I'm getting a lot of great ideas just even being on this call. I mean, great idea to reach out to your EV drivers and find out what their pain points were. I think that we could have done more to engage regular citizens in our planning process. As I've mentioned, we had a lot of local government and business participation, but we didn't hear from regular people in our community, partially because of COVID, but we have our group has discussed that moving forward into implementation, we really want to be intentional with our outreach by engaging key community groups, even just beyond EVs, to ask about their transportation concerns in general, to see how our EV plan and our other climate action efforts can help be part of the solution. We do know that not everyone in our community can afford an EV, let alone a new car. So we plan to offer rebates for e-bikes, and we're talking about rebates for used vehicles. We'd also like to explore the possibilities for EV ride sharing, maybe in some neighborhoods that are particularly underserved by public transit. And then also, that'll help to introduce people to EVs who might not have otherwise had that opportunity. So it's really an ongoing conversation. There are a lot of really great resources available about equity and clean energy program planning. And one that we have found particularly useful and are going to adopt the checklist from is the Urban Sustainability Directors Network Guidebook on Equitable Clean Energy Program Design for Local Governments and Partners. And I'd be happy to link to that in the chat. It's got a really great checklist in the back for program design and implementation with a lot of important key things to think through.
Yeah, I think a lot of the attendees would be interested in seeing that. If you could link it in the chat, that would be wonderful. And then I'd just like to open this up to all of our other panelists. Is there any certain highlights or equitable approaches in your EV plan, or things that, maybe now you're realizing, oh, we need to consider? I'd be curious in hearing any other thoughts on that.
Well, as Jess said, this has given me some ideas to bring back to our planning and implementation team, especially in the areas of equitable planning. One thing that we have discussed, which would assist all of our residents, would be to provide information to people about how to put in an electric charger at their home, at their home. There's a couple of different types of chargers, as we know here on this call. What works for them, especially for people who are retired. We do have a lot of retired people in Centennial, and so they may be thinking about buying their first EV, but they want to know what the cost is going to be, and not just the cost of the vehicle, but the cost of maintaining the vehicle, adapting their homes. So I think that's one thing we can look at implementing through our program.
We specifically looked at e-bikes, and there happens to be a pilot project that the state is doing that is around e-bikes. And so we worked with our housing authority to help them submit one of those e-bike pilot project grants, with the goal of trying to help our folks who live in our affordable housing, low-income housing, access e-bikes and e-bike pools. Especially given that in some, at different times our transit is not meeting all of their needs. So we looked at that. And then the other thing that we did, and this is somewhat equity, is we, in addition to doing the community survey and the EV owner survey, we actually, as a part of our planning process, did a workplace survey for the city of Steamboat Springs. We have 253 employees, only one of whom owns an EV at present. But we found out that half of our employees could not charge at home, would not be able to install chargers at home. And so that was really eye-opening for us. And that's when we realized that in order to make EVs available, we really needed to focus on that workplace charging and the community charging. And both of those things can also hopefully support our tourism efforts. So I encourage surveys of people that don't have EVs that are really targeted. For us, it was our workforce. We could have done, I think one of the ones that we will do next is probably partner with our housing authority to do resident surveys to really find out what their sticky points are.
Yeah, wonderful. That seems like a really great approach, especially given the types of housings in your community. Well, I am on our last part of the question. So while I'm asking these, any attendees in the audience, please feel free to type any questions that may have come to you into the chat. But now we're going to kind of move on to what's the best way to get started. So Jess, I'll start with you. You were able to use the Partners in Energy EV Toolkit to help inform your planning process. Can you tell us how this helped get you started?
Yeah. So because I had participated in a few community planning efforts before, like our energy action plan and our climate action plan, and because we had the structure for our stakeholder group created through our climate action plan and the working groups that came out of it, we felt really confident leading this process ourselves, but that confidence was bolstered by having the EV planning toolkit. It was very helpful for providing a framework to start from. And, so before we got started, I read through it, kind of thought through how the process might look. And early on, when one of our first meetings brought our group together, and we decided what are the major sections that we want to include in the plan. And then as I was preparing for each meeting, I would reference the toolkit and say, okay, here are the key strategies for light duty fleets, or here are the key strategies for community outreach. And so we would pull those out to help structure our stakeholder meetings and our conversations to figure out what were the strategies the group wanted to include in our plan. So using that toolkit as a starting point, we had 5 planning meetings focused on vision and goals, infrastructure, policy, light duty fleets, public transit, and community outreach. It was really helpful. But we also were able to get some graduate support from the Partners in Energy program, which was really nice too, because we were able to do some analyses on the back end about our strategies, which was not something that I would have been able to do by myself. And I do think that it helps to create a more robust document. So we were really happy to be able to leverage those resources too.
Yes, definitely. And with that, talking about utilizing different resources, we did talk about different funding resources today. And Vanessa, you used, I believe, at least 2 separate state funding sources. Can you speak to that application process and any advice that you have for communities that are using these resources?
Yeah, definitely. We did use the 2 funding sources from DOLA and the CEO. And since they were both state funds, thankfully the application processes were a bit easier than some of those big federal funding opportunities tend to be. I would say that firstly, I want to mention that I was not around during the grant application process, but I did talk to my colleague who spearheaded it. And she said that the DOLA process was a bit more formal and the CEO process was a bit less informal a process. And she felt like both funding opportunities were a reasonable amount of time and that was spent putting them together. And, the town is always willing to share anything we've put together, or, I'm happy if anyone wants to reach out to me to talk through some of the application process and what was involved. But I would say it was low to moderately time consuming versus some of these more involved federal processes. But I think the most important thing I want to share, just knowing who's on this call today, I know we have a lot of folks from municipalities and governments, we covered a lot of ground. And as some of the panelists said, I'm learning so much, in every one of these webinars or things that I participate in related to electric vehicles, I feel like the knowledge base is increasing. So I think participation in opportunities like these is really incredibly critical, because for us, we do have millions of visitors every year, but we're a town of, a little less than 6,000 people. We have a very small staff. We're very rural. We've got very limited resources. I'm a division of 1 person, trying to manage parking and transit. So if you're sitting out there thinking, oh my gosh, where on earth do I start? This EV plan process, especially with these funding opportunities that are available through, through DOLA and the Colorado Energy Office, and this great network around this virtual table of people that are so willing to help out, that's a really great place to start. Because I think that not only did our community learn a lot through our EV planning process, our stakeholders learned so much as well. And I mean, the internal stakeholders here at the town, like we all learned a lot about what we didn't know and what we needed to include in this plan, and how to start to connect some of these infrastructure investments that have been made along the way together into a cohesive vision. And so, I can speak for the town team, this cross-departmental town team that's been working on everything related to electric vehicles, from the charging station infrastructure, which was really spearheaded by our local utility, to the planning process and trolley implementation. We have, public works staff members, we have utility staff members, we have our community development staff members. all kind of pitching in, and we're all learning along the way. So I think if I was going to leave this group with anything, it's, you can come to it like many of us did in Estes Park, which is we're really excited about electric vehicles and the technology and what it can mean for our community, but we don't know anything. And so this learning, kind of this experiential learning process and hands-on learning process has been really just wonderful for us. And I would say leveraging the resources that are available throughout the state, whether, for me, it's been talking to the folks at RTD who, in RAFTA, who had the first electric vehicles. It's been talking to, our partners at Northern Clean Cities, just trying to figure out, okay, what are we doing and where do we need to go? So I think just if you're sitting out there thinking, oh my, where do I start? Phone a friend, and then I think you'll have everything that you need. And so I just want to welcome anybody who's interested in reaching out to ping me, and we're always happy to help. But I think a great first step is to get that EV planning process started.
Thank you so much. And Winnie, one thing that you've mentioned is you all hired a consultant for that process. Can you give any recommendations on communities that are looking to also hire a consultant on what that kind of first step looks like, or what that process was like for you?
Yep. I Googled EV planning RFPs and I found a whole bunch of them, and it was great. A lot of them were from California, and then I was able to find some from Colorado, and it was useful for me to look through and see what other communities were trying to get from their consultants in that EV planning process. So really the first step is looking through other RFPs and seeing kind of what the world is that you can be asking for, and then prioritizing the things that you feel that you need that assistance with. We really wanted someone that had a framework and experience in EV planning. We knew we wanted an equity analysis and a siting analysis. We have a reasonable number of EV charging stations in our community. But really they're helter-skelter. It was, a business or an organization was gung-ho and so installed them. They're not necessarily where you would need them. I guess I'll leave it at that. And so we wanted someone that had that expertise to kind of do some analysis for us. And then also begin to make sure that we were asking the right questions on our community engagement. So that piece was super helpful. And so I would say, start with Googling EV planning RFPs and finding a couple and looking through them and seeing what really stands out to you as an area where you'd like to pull in that outside expertise. We found it very helpful. We're a small staff, and it was really nice to have expertise and capacity.
Definitely. Yeah. Sometimes to get started, you just need to look some things up and know where to go from there. And then my last question is for Councilmember Mike. So you are just getting started with implementation. Can you tell us about, some of the next exciting things that you're focusing on?
Sure. Thanks. I think what we're focusing on is we start with the low-hanging fruit. Okay, it may not be really exciting. So on our focus areas, municipal fleet, we have one vehicle which is due to be replaced in our half a dozen city-owned vehicles due to be replaced this year. So we're looking at possibly doing an electric vehicle for that. This current vehicle is a very small SUV, so we wouldn't necessarily need an SUV for this vehicle, but we do have a fleet manager or someone that works on that. So we're starting with that. The public EV adoption process, that's going to be a long-term project. We're just starting to work with our community development department on looking at our codes for updates. The public stations portion, we're looking at places where we could install public stations with partnerships with our businesses, with our park districts. And I think it's really important for funding too. I just like to throw this in. It's important for funding to reach out to businesses in your community to see if they may have some similar initiatives for renewable energy. I think there's some funding potential there with a public-private partnership to do that. And finally, EV-ready development. I think it's important to start working with your developers if someone's going to come in with a redevelopment plan for a shopping center site, for instance. Have your code ready and maybe have some potential incentives ready to offer those folks. So no, it's not, tremendously exciting. As you all know, this is the meat and potatoes that have to be fixed before the exciting things start. So that's what I would add.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you again to all of you for joining us today. And now we're going to move on to some of the audience questions that we may have. So Lynn, is there anything that you found in the chat that people are asking?
No, I think we've been answering them as we go along. If anyone does have questions, feel free to unmute yourself now for the last couple of minutes, or just go ahead and type them into the chat. But in the meantime, I'll go ahead and share my screen for the last few slides.
Perfect. And what I'll do as well, if you do have questions, like she said, yes, please type them in the chat or go ahead and speak up. I am also going to pull up our next poll and get that started as well. So if you have a couple questions or a couple of minutes, please answer these questions for us. And I just want to thank everybody again, for the engaging conversations. I know I've learned a lot. I always think it's great to hear from other peers on, what steps and processes, you all went through. So thank you all so much for not only taking action to help our climate, but also taking the time today to kind of give some best practices and lessons learned. We really appreciate that. All right, and I'll give just a couple more seconds here for the poll. Wonderful. And I'm happy to hear that nobody is less likely to get started on creating an EV plan after this workshop. And yeah, it sounds like, we covered a lot of the questions that you may have had. I will go ahead and stop sharing now. I did want to highlight, we have a couple more events coming soon. On March 23rd, we are going to have the second part in this workshop series that will cover creating a strategic EV education and outreach plan. We'll have Zach Owens from the Colorado Energy Office there to speak with us, as well as Lashida Sayer from the Zozo Group to hit on more on that equity piece that we discussed earlier today as well, and more. And then following that, if you have a fleet that is looking to learn best practices on fleet electrification, please join us April 7th from 12 to 2, and we will highlight that at that time as well. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at any time. I will send the recording of this event as well as the slides and contact information to you all. So that way, if you have questions, we can follow up then as well. So awesome, thank you so much. And actually, I will go ahead and link those registration links in the chat, and I'll stay on just in case anybody happens to have any other questions that come up. I will be here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for all the panelists, by the way, for attending.
Yes, big thank you to each of you for joining us. Very insightful information. Wonderful. If there is no further questions, I will go ahead and end it here. And thank you all so much.
Hi, Amy.
Bye. Thanks, Amy.
Hey,
Thank
Amy.
you. Oh, yeah.
Hey, Amy. Do you have the ability to save the chat and can you email the chat over too? Because I'm on my cell phone and I don't have the option to save the chat.
Yeah, no problem. I just saved it now, and I think I usually have that setting enabled because it's really handy, but I can
It
send
is
that
so
over.
handy. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Great panel. Thank you.
Thank you. We're looking forward to the
Thank you,
next.
Amy.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you,
Goodbye now.
everyone.
Bye.
Awesome job, Amy. You did a great job. Thank you, Lynn.
Thanks, Diego. Take care.